Ameneh is one of my colleagues at the Children's Hospital at Westmead. She's a senior lecturer in child and adolescent health for the University of Sydney, and she's based at the Kids Hospital at Westmead, where she also works as a paediatric infectious diseases physician. Her research focuses on novel therapeutic options for difficult to treat infections, including phage therapy. So this is all the rage, and optimisation of antimicrobial therapy for children with cystic fibrosis. She was the first clinician in Australia to treat a child with intravenous phage therapy in October 2019 for a highly resistant Pseudomonas aeruginosa bone infection, and she's been overseeing the planning and treatment of other patients using phages against other organisms. She's a real dynamo. It's wonderful having her in our department, and now spending some time in New York City. She's the paediatric representative of the Australian Society for Infectious Diseases Clinical Research Network, and she's really keen to get children involved in clinical trials, particularly early phase studies. She does a whole heap of other work, and you're going to hear about it now in her presentation. Thank you so much, Ameneh.
No worries. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And yes, I arrived in New York about 4 or 5 days ago. The talk I'm going to give, I think the original title was Around the World in a little more than 80 days, and my journey and how I found my feet as a clinician-scientist. This book, I'm sure you've all read, and most of you probably love as much as I do. And I think it sort of captures a lot of the lessons that I've learned through my journey. And so although it says lessons from science and research, I'm going to reflect these from lessons from Dr. Seuss as well. So just by way of background, I originally completed medical school in New Zealand, in Auckland, and it's an undergraduate degree, so a 6-year course. And then I spent the next sort of 4.5, 5 years doing my general and basic pediatric training. I started off in New Zealand, where I had graduated in both tertiary teaching hospitals as well as some more regional hospitals. I spent some time in Australia at the Kids Hospital, initially back in 2006, and then also in the United Kingdom, where again I got to work in some both London as well as sort of more peripheral hospitals, district hospitals as well in Brighton. So I've had the opportunity to live in beach towns and major cities along the way, and really experience a diversity in how pediatricians can be pediatricians, and the cultures of practice in medicine, as well as the opportunity to live on Brick Lane with its amazing diversity of cultures and food. At the end of that time, I sort of knew that I wanted to do infectious diseases as a subspecialty, but I became aware that the thing that I was lacking, despite the fact that I worked in a lot of places and experienced, as I said, a lot of different ways of doing medicine, I didn't really have good research experience. And so I'd done the usual things that you get through, basic training and medical school, literature reviews and audits and things like that, but I didn't really have any good research experience. And my supervisor at the Royal London Hospital brought up an advert they were looking for people to fill in a position of clinical research fellow at the University of Oxford. I have to say, initially, it was just a geeky childhood dream to be at University of Oxford, which made me go for this. And I think this was my first lesson in my journey of being a researcher, which is to just be curious and be open to opportunities. And what those opportunities provided for me was something really fantastic, ultimately. And I got to work with or under the supervision of Professor Andrew Pollard, who probably everyone knows of now, of Chadox or AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine fame. And I spent about sort of 4.5, almost 5 years in Oxford as a clinical research fellow, and then subsequently as an academic clinical lecturer. My research was on, so the title of my thesis was Serogroup C meningococcal conjugate vaccines, immunogenicity, immune persistence, and the induction of immunological memory. And as you can see from the title, it was more about the immunology of infectious diseases or protection from infectious diseases rather than, you know, the pathology or pathogenesis of infections, and working on meningococcal C. So in terms of what that provided me, as I said, it was an amazing opportunity. And what I was a part of was producing impactful research. And I hadn't realized how impactful it was at the time. And it was only actually in the last couple of years where I've been writing other grant applications where you have to think about what is the impact of the work that you've done. I can actually look back and reflect and see that actually what I did wasn't just produce a thesis and get a doctorate. I did impactful research. So as I said, it was the immunological basis of MenC conjugate vaccinations in children. And what my work resulted in was a better understanding of how incredibly responsive the immune system is to very subtle variations in antigen presentation. And this has had profound implications for vaccine development and schedule design, including the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine, which, you know, billions of people around the world will probably receive. And at the time, this research contributed to an evidence base for changes to the MenC schedule of vaccines in the United Kingdom for children. I also had some incredible personal gains. I learned how to write, and he was an incredibly critical supervisor, but he made me so much better in the way I write medical writing. How to present, I got to present at some major international conferences in Europe, and a real love of clinical research, as well as meeting my now husband. And getting to travel around Europe, which at the time was very easy to do. My second lesson came on a little bit later on. So after I finished my time in Oxford, I came back to Sydney, to the Kids Hospital, to finish my clinical training. Because I sort of put that on hold for a while. And by then I was absolutely convinced I wanted to do infectious diseases. And I was lucky enough to be able to come back to a hospital that I loved, and did that for 3 years, my advanced training. The second lesson, as I said, is about taking chances, both on yourself and also on others. At that time, I was about to get married and my husband was living in New York. And so I decided to move to New York to be with him. And I sort of reached out through contacts and came across this gentleman, Professor Ratner, who at the time was moving from Columbia to set up a new department at NYU. And he took a chance on me, coming from halfway across the world. He didn't know anything about me. And I hadn't actually been referred to him. I'd been referred to other people in Colombia. But I decided to take a chance on him. He seemed like a really lovely guy. And again, I had a wonderful opportunity to be able to do some postdoctoral research in vaccine research. But this was really preclinical vaccine research. And I was looking at the serotype distribution and co-colonization with group B streptococcus in women. But this allowed me the opportunity to upskill a lot of my other skills in terms of microbiology and laboratory skills. And also using my experience in clinical vaccine research to help Adam develop his trajectory from moving from preclinical research to more clinical research. So that was a really good combination for both of us. The third lesson, I think I eventually learned in terms of being mindful, that during all this time, you do need to take time for yourself, for your family and for your friends. And a lot of wonderful opportunities had come up, and each time it was sort of too good to say no, and I had done quite a lot. And I'd sort of put off some things, including having children. And so at that point, I decided that that's what needed to happen. And so my first son, Yusuf, was born in New York, end of 2017. And I took a year off. And I really enjoyed having actually 14 months and not rushing to come back to work, and really getting a balance and enjoying that time with him was really good for me, I think. And sorry. The fourth lesson I think I've learned along the way is to be patient. So after my time of maternity leave, I wanted to come back to Sydney. I had really enjoyed my time. And I also it was very clear to me that the 3 years in Sydney where I had just done clinical work and the year and a half in New York where I had just done research, they were great, but I missed the other half when I wasn't doing it. And so what I really wanted was a job which would allow me to be a clinician and a researcher. And another too good to miss out opportunity came up, which was to come back to Sydney as a senior lecturer for the university and a clinical academic for the hospital, which would allow me to do exactly what I'd wanted. And so that's what I did in 2019. I came back to Sydney. But at that point, I was sort of a bit lost because I didn't really know where to from there. I'd been given this opportunity and a fairly senior position, and I had to establish myself, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And there were lots of options. There were things that I was interested in, things that I had experience in, including things like antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial stewardship or optimization. I had done a lot of cystic fibrosis work. I was really interested in public health because of my vaccinology background. I had spent a lot of, my 3 years previously doing a lot of the refugee and migrant health. And as I said, my PhD was immunology rather than infectious diseases per se. And I loved clinical trials. And so I didn't really know what exactly I wanted to focus in on. And it was good that year no one rushed me and I didn't rush myself. And I had the time to be able to actually think about what it was that I really wanted to do. And a really wonderful bit of advice that someone gave me, which was lesson number 5, to be efficient, is to try and align your clinical and research interests. And for me, that worked out brilliantly because essentially what I got into was this novel advanced therapeutics for difficult to treat infections in children. So this phage therapy, which meant that I could focus on things like antimicrobial resistance, antimicrobial stewardship, cystic fibrosis. A lot of those things kind of just really coalesced and meant that I could do what I was doing clinically anyway in terms of my research as well. At the moment, I'm working with Professor Idell at Westmead Hospital and WIMA, and we have had some success that Louise has mentioned, including being on the cover of a medical journal recently with a recent publication, which again is a very geeky but exciting milestone for me, I think. And then the final lesson is be lucky and work with great people. So I have been incredibly lucky. I've had wonderful mentors and supervisors and collaborators and juniors on my team and admin staff and incredible people that I've worked with along the way. And I think if you are appreciative of the people that you're working with and working for and working alongside, and you reciprocate, you will be successful. And I think that's been one of the most important things.